So, the way that Crystal deals with the fame, I mean, she becomes pretty much a recluse, right?
Yeah, she not immediately, but over time she
Mhm.
she gets really focused on the next problem um that Mars puts up, and that becomes the new quest and the new obsession, and not necessarily in healthy ways for her, and certainly
Hmm.
not for Rick, who I think Rick wanted to, clear the first proof, and then that's out of the way of the
Sure.
most important thing to him, which is their relationship.
Yeah. I wonder if you can play armchair psychologist a little bit more so than that because you wrote the book and these characters. Like, I guess maybe what So, am I correct that Crystal's mom had walked out on the family?
Yeah, yeah, it's not mentioned too much in there, but there's a reference or two to the idea that her family immigrated from Europe in the lead up to World War II,
Hmm.
and then her mom moved back sometime, I think in the early 1950s, and just kind of left the family.
And her father's a character. He's a scientist or mathematician,
Yeah, he's a statistician. Yeah,
statistician, right? And he's a character. He's the one that's I know it so well, like a father or a grandfather that just can't wait to talk to younger people. I guess not
yeah.
younger people, just everyone, right? He just loves to talk to them, and he seems to be a really good spirited guy, and they get along. But is it a product of like them being too similar
I
that they kind of rubs her the wrong way at times, where she can't spend too much time around him?
I think that's an aspect of it, and he can't take anything too seriously. Like he's a performer, and so he needs
Yeah.
to kind of control things and get a laugh out of people.
Hmm.
Uh, and the voice for Carl started out that way because in the early drafts, he was kind of providing some of the narration of the history of
Ah.
um, the Martian communication, because Rick is so serious and kind of
Yeah. Yes.
so love struck and so focused that I wanted some levity to balance that out and some
Hmm.
humor in it. And it didn't work out to keep him narrating that with the way the structure was set up. But it was fun to keep as a character and to work
Yeah.
in and to let that chafe against Crystal. I mean, I think a lot of
Huh.
people in their 20s get easily bothered by their parents, and especially if the parent is a big personality, then then that can kind of exacerbate that.
So one of the things that draws Crystal and Rick together, or further apart, or maybe it's subtle, but is um, that Rick definitely has trouble with his father. His father is a cynic. One of the things that they both shared, again, this is Crystal and Rick, is this love or fascination with Lucas Holiday, right? He's
Yeah,
this he's this kind of, again, I keep using, popular science. He was the one who would he kind of translated science for the layman, for lay people. He'd be on the radio or TV. He had the performance aspect to it. I think,
yeah.
some of the scientists out there, the stereotype is, they're maybe not able to convey the meaning so well. Um, but he ends up being basically just being a charlatan for the money.
Somewhat. I don't. That's not
Right? Because
my
yeah, he kind of knew his
complete
stuff
read
though,
on
right?
him.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
I mean, he wasn't a famous scientist. He was a professor of science, and so he knew his stuff, but he wasn't like the standout genius who's likely to solve
Right.
this almost unsolvable math problem. But yeah, his brilliance is in the communication
Hmm.
aspect of it, and I think and in inspiring people about the questions and about science. So he's heavily based on Carl Sagan, except I think of him as like
Uh-huh.
a low rent Carl Sagan,
Yeah.
who's got kind of an aspect of the charlatan about him, but
Okay.
I think he's a charlatan and a true believer at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good way
Uh,
to put it for sure. Yeah, he's not a one-dimensional, just, trying to do it for the bag
yeah,
of
I don't
money.
think he's not a straight out con man. I think
No.
he bought into his own myth a little much.
Huh. But so I kind of wonder, so I wonder about the connection between Rick and his father. Like, some seem to be broken. Like, there was the Zeno, am I saying that name right? Zeno,
I think
the
so. Yeah.
yeah, Zeno paradox, right? Of like, it's a classic one about, okay, if I'm half a field away from you, and then that's in half of that is one fourth, and and on and on and on. It's this
Yeah.
paradox of it never really stops, right? I'm obviously not saying it in a complex way, but my long-winded question is like, did it become like a competition between father and son where son was kind of finally able to like beat his dad on the basketball court, so to speak? He was
Yeah, I
able to
think
kind of be an intellectual, superior or match. What was
yeah,
the kind of
I think it's a moment like that, or at least of young Rick trying to be an intellectual match and
Mhm.
like outwit his dad. And to me, it felt like a rift that was waiting to happen and just needed the
Mm.
catalyst for that to
Yeah.
happen. Um, and I kind of knew going into part two, my intent was to start expanding the type of emotional distance that I wanted the book to explore. You know, I
Mhm.
didn't want it to be just distance in this romantic relationship.
Mm.
And so I thought, let me explore Rick's relationship with his family too. And I think it happens a lot with fathers and sons where um, there becomes this distance that there's almost no reason for, or an
Mm.
antagonism that's not based in too much. Yeah, I was talking about Steve Yarborough's classes earlier, and I was in an essay, like a nonfiction workshop with him as an undergrad, and there was a guy there from the wrestling team, and he was writing an essay um, about all this tension and all these arguments between him and his dad when he was going through his very successful high school wrestling career.
Mm.
Um, and Steve asked the class, he's like, "Do you think that this all these arguments are really about wrestling, or do you think there's something else behind it?" And everyone's like, "There's something else behind it. There's this
Mhm.
got to be this issue or that issue." And then Steve talked about it. He's like, "No, this can absolutely be the thing. This thing that is the point of purpose for the sports driven dad
Mm.
and the kid who is having the career themselves, like that sort of thing can absolutely lead to that
Mm.
tension." I was thinking of that a little bit, and the idea that like it can just be this thing where sons and their fathers just stop getting along
Mm.
for very little reason. And so I wanted to explore that phenomenon, and I liked it better with the idea that there wasn't a big important reason that shouldn't have been able to be solved, but is
Yeah.
why is this rift there,
Yeah.
and what is Rick going to do with it?
Yeah, I really like how you play with that. It wasn't didactic. It wasn't like a teaching moment or moralistic. It was like you said, you kept it subtle, you kept it a little bit unknown, right?
Yep.
Um, and then so of course you talk about distance, and I love that image of like there's actually physical distance where Rick and his mom would be listening or watching to Holiday's show,
Yeah.
right? And she would kind of like smile like through the open door, and he would kind of pretend like he didn't like it, but he just loved the fact that they were actually close, even though they weren't in the same room. There's something so cool about them listening to the same show, but in different rooms in their different ways.
Yeah, he's a teenager then. He's too proud to be
Yes,
like, "I love my mom," but
right.
he he can't display it, but he still feels it. And I think that kind of it suggests that he feels that way with his dad, even though they're more actively
Hmm.
antagonistic to each other. Like he doesn't want it to be that way, but he doesn't know his way out of it.
Yeah. So like you're talking about, there's part two. There's three parts overall, and part two, as part two goes on, Rick is older. It's maybe what 8 or 9 years after the initial trip. Or is it
It,
1971?
yeah, and by part three, I think it's 1972,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
72,
or
73.
1973 is the start of the trip, somewhere in there.
Right. So, he's Rick hasn't really moved on. They're the letters that become much less common, but they're letters between him and Crystal. She doesn't let him know where she lives. He even does a couple tries to visit her places he thinks where she is, and he's unsuccessful. And he becomes a professor at UC Davis. Go Aggies, right?
Yeah, go Aggies. Yeah,
Yeah, and living in his family's old place. His parents had passed away. Way back, not way back, but long enough time. You talk about this whole idea of like, what is it? If the father dies first, the mother usually lives for a long time, or is it vice versa?
yeah. I think that's what I said. There's farmhouse law. If the father
Right,
dies
farmhouse
first,
law.
or the husband dies first, the wife will live another 30
That's
years.
it.
If the wife dies first, the husband's gone within a year.
and the latter is what happened, right? So,
Yeah.
there's even this situation where there's Angie, who's a little bit older than him, but really good person and a professor as well, and they have a connection, and she wants more, and he's just not able to do it.
Yeah.
And she, I mean, she's angry as one would be, but she's not. She's more like, hey, you got to move on. I can tell it's you're closed up, and
Yeah.
never say never, but no, for now, I know we can't do it.
I've
What? Go ahead.
I've seen some Goodreads reviews where people say they're team Angie, or say justice for Angie, and I always appreciate that, because I kind of feel that way too. I mean, I feel like that would probably be the smarter decision for Rick at that point in his life, is to
Mm-hmm.
just say, like, here's this good thing that's here
Yeah.
in front of him, he should take it.
Mm.
But I think that's why I kind of like that moment, is because it's hard to say whether that's the right choice.
Well, I'm paraphrasing J Lo here. I think, what is it? Not Mr. not Mrs. Right, but Mrs. Right now. I don't know. That might have worked for him. No, but so the distance with these letters, do you feel like he? I mean, he becomes a solid professor at a good university, but he's not, writing these articles that, well, maybe he is, but not as much, that, like, only other people are reading, like only other scientists or mathematicians are reading these journals. He's not Stephen Hawking. Does he kind of, is it this whole kind of idea of, like, he kind of settles, like, if he can't have the best, which would be her, and the life that came with that, then he's kind of just gonna not necessarily challenge himself and live kind of comfortable-ish?
Yeah, I think so, that he he just sets himself on getting by, because his
Yeah.
one purpose and his one drive has been Crystal, and as that becomes increasingly out of reach, he becomes a little more apathetic, and he
Uh-huh.
doesn't necessarily acknowledge it, but he's probably on I don't know if I call him depressed, but he becomes a little more closed up, maybe
Yeah.
a little bitter in some ways,
Yeah.
um, and a lot less idealistic than he was in part
Mm-hmm.
one.
Yeah.
Um, and he's kind of feeling like it gets talked about a little more in part three than in part two, but the second Mars equation isn't about distance, it's about entropy. And
Mm.
I think that's his feeling of his feeling in part two is his life is undergoing entropy, and all the structure and energy and interest it had is just kind of falling apart and dissipating.
So the idea of entropy, right, that obviously Crystal is very interested in, as is Rick and so many scientists, mathematicians, even philosophers, right,
Yeah.
is basically, right, is that the world is the sun's going to, what, burn out,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah,
no
but
going backwards. There's only one end.
yeah, that all energy kind of eventually progresses to its most unorganized form, and
Mm-hmm.
basically everything just kind of dies out eventually. So it's kind of it's the sad, depressing philosophical topic of science.
Quite possibly the most depressing possible.
Yeah, the heat death of the universe.
The heat death of the universe. So, again, we're kind of getting to the point of the plot now where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna kind of leave it alone for sake of, spoilers and such.
Yeah.
But just like what she's going through in those years, does she, you as a wrestler, I know neither you or I were Kobe Bryant, or, insert star wrestler
Yeah,
here, or,
yeah,
but just this idea of, like, just being the top of the top, cream of the creme de la creme, right? Just like being obsessed with being the greatest. I think of Jordan,
yeah.
Jordan and Kobe, like, they absolutely obsessed with it. LeBron, he spends, $1 million a year on recovery and that kind of thing. Is there a special loneliness at the top? Is that part of hers? Just that she can't turn her brain off. She's so brilliant that obsession is all that she can do, but it's definitely injurious to her life, to her mental well-being.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's different approaching the second question, because in the first question, the first proof, she's just so curious about it. She wants to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think she feels that she solved the first proof because she wanted to. And I think she's working on the second proof because
Mm.
she has to. She's the one. She has to do it again.
Mm.
And so yeah, I think there's the pressure more than the enjoyment on the
Mm-hmm.
second one. And also, the person who's the person to do the first one isn't necessarily the person to do the second one, but that's not
Huh.
an idea that I think she could cope with. Um, And so yeah, I think it's much different. And I think it's probably something a lot of, writers can relate to as
I
they're
was going to
working on
ask.
the second book.
I
I've
was
been
going to
trying
ask.
to write next books, and so far it hasn't been going great. It's been kind of fun to struggle.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you write the first book and get it out there, and there's a lot of sense of accomplishment, and then you write down to do another one, and it's not like, okay, I can just repeat this thing. It's like it's a whole new ball game.
Oh man. What have you done for me lately? Is there something to that?
What do you mean?
This idea of like, whether it's an internal pressure, again, you can talk about yourself or Crystal or just in general, but like, is there an internal pressure, or is it the external pressure saying kind of like, what have you done for me lately? What's
Oh
next?
yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's some of both. I mean, there's no external pressure. I haven't, my agent hasn't been bullying me or anything like
Okay.
that. Uh, but
Are you sure? Blink
it,
twice if okay. Okay.
in internal pressure, yeah, I feel like, okay, it's time to settle down and write this next one. I was really busy for a lot of this year promoting the book, and I've got a couple of kids in elementary school, and that's been a lot of work.
Hmm.
Um, but now I feel like, okay, it's time. And it's been an interesting shift, because I felt like, while I was promoting this book, I felt like, okay, I've done this. I can do this again. Like I can write another book, no problem. I had ideas that I liked, and then you sit down to write the ideas, and like getting the actual scenes out there is not
Hmm.
easy the way you anticipate it being.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's a better feeling, like to be sitting and working and thinking, can I do this? Then I can do this. Like
Hmm.
it's or like maybe I can't do this. It ignites kind of I think it ignites that underdog feeling, and that feeling of like, okay, I'm doing this alone in the cave. People aren't, most people aren't really like holding their breath for me or anything. It's just
Hmm.
something that I've got to do on my own, me and the computer, if
Yeah.
it's going to happen. And that's kind of a good feeling, even when the individual writing days are frustrating.
Hmm. Well, I mean, the praise is was heaping praise from NPR Books called it entrancing, and the Wall Street Journal, a novel of twin obsessions they wrote. The Millions, which we love, they is quote the best kind of literary sci-fi, the kind of novel that makes the reader appreciate the mystery and beauty of our little infinite universe. So some well-deserved, some great praise. NPR Books, did they cover it on like an audio segment, or was it written, or
No, it just showed up in the end of year. It
yes,
used
that's
to be
right.
called the Book Concierge, and I don't think it is anymore. I think it's just called like Books We Love, and it showed up there.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that was a really cool surprise.
Oh
And
yeah.
one of the kind of things I didn't expect at all
Huh.
from having the book out is that it helped me reconnect with some people from my past. Like
Ah.
one of my like elementary school friends' mom saw it on the NPR thing,
Mhm.
and she told her son, who I hadn't talked to in, probably since like sophomore year of high school.
Mm.
And so he like sent me a text like, "Hey, I heard about your book. Are you famous now?" Um,
Nice.
and I said, "No, not really." but then we started like texting each other, and I went up and took my kids to meet his kids earlier in the year.
Cool.
So that sort of thing has been cool, and
Yeah.
it happens when something that's kind of a major press outlet picks up your book and
Right.
mentions it. That's
So
a
cool.
fun result.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. So with leaving the literal ending alone, but like is there, I mean, we talk about entropy, like that is dark.
Yeah.
Literally figuratively, that's so dark, this idea that like things are always getting worse, basically, right? Things, that like the not the default mode, but yeah, the you just the end is near. If the end is not near, the end is going to happen. And ideas of distance, right? Ideas of loneliness. What if they don't care on Mars? What if there
Yeah.
is intelligent life, but and this idea that obviously Crystal is lonely in so many ways, as is Rick, and it's a human condition. Is there like, I mean, is it a pessimistic idea? Is it optimistic as well? Just the idea that there is that need for a connection, there is that desire for a connection, that could be seen as a positive.
Yeah, I think so. And this book came out surprisingly hopeful, I'd say, given how I usually write. Other short stories I write before this are usually like aimed toward the most depressing ending possible. You watch Black Mirror and you watch an episode and it leaves you feeling like the world is ugly. Like that, that's like the usual short story ending I'd be going for. And I didn't know, I wasn't necessarily trying to aim for that, but that felt like the place
Yeah.
I knew how to go. And in a
Mhm.
short story, you've got space for like kind of one major reversal that's going to happen at the end is the climactic thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but something a novel length requires more shifts than that. And
Right.
so it's like, okay, you need to work upward and then work downward and then work upward. You need these patterns of success and failure, not to be too schematic about it.
Sure.
But you need some ups and downs, and I think that gives you more potential
Mm.
to land on an up note, but also to kind of wrestle with what the ups and downs mean and what they average out to. And there's
Mm.
a scene in the book where, Rick and another character are kind of trying to come to terms with what it means that Crystal has gone from their lives,
Mhm.
and accept that there are some parts of that they can't control, and
Mhm.
um, all they can kind of control is how they react to that, which sounds kind of new agey and like all I control is my response to things. Um, but I think it was kind of interesting for me to cope with that question and say, like, what does it mean and how should Rick be thinking about this? Because the
Mm.
way he's been dealing with it for 12 years has not been doing him any good.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. What not to put you on the spot, but like what would be maybe like one of the darkest endings of one of your short stories we should check out? You talk about some real dark ones. Like what's one that comes to mind?
There's one about I'll spoil it a little because I don't think anyone's really like on the edge of their seat for my 7-year-old short stories. But there's one
Ah,
that about a plant geneticist who's working for a Monsanto like
okay.
corporation that buys the world's last seed bank and plans to destroy it.
Mm.
Um, and he's like talking with the reporter, trying to get the word out, and trying to do something to put a stop to it. And you kind of get this feeling, okay, like maybe he's going to be able to have an impact. And
Mm.
then by the end of the story, he realizes that he the system is too big. He can't have an effect on it. He blows himself up with
Okay, okay, okay.
with a bomb he was going to plan. He was thinking about using to do something at the facility to save the seed bank.
Uh,
And then the last lines of the story, it shifts into him like telling a parable of the ark story, the biblical ark story.
oof.
But he changes the ending to the ark caught fire, the ark sank. So that
God
that's
damn, I'm sorry I asked. I'm sorry I asked. Oh
so yeah,
man.
it's quite a downer of an ending, but I do
Yeah.
love to take a swing for that.
To me, there's always something about like the narrator's voice, like in juxtaposition, or in this case, not with like the final ending that sounds like in this case makes it even more depressing. Like, wow. Yeah, I'm sorry. No, it sounds cool though.
Thanks.
You're talking about the like schematics and like, the shifts and at this point in the story this should happen. Do you have any screenwriting background or any designs on getting into screenwriting?
I don't have a screenwriting background, but it's something that I've read some books on, some craft books on. Not, I guess I might have started before I wrote this. I'm not sure,
Mm.
but I've just read a couple. And I find screenwriting has a much more robust like vocabulary and set of concepts for what
Mm.
it's doing story wise and plot wise, and that fiction writers are tend to be very wary of that. And I think
Mm.
with some good reason. I don't think usually you want a novel to be as planned out as a screenplay, and you don't want it
Sure.
to stick to some of the screenplay
Like
templates.
tropes. Okay, templates.
Not that all screenplays should follow that template. Um,
Yeah.
but it does give you a sense, I think it helps understand like, okay, here are some of the ebbs and flows of a story and things that a lot of stories, including long form fiction, tend to do. The ups and downs, the big
Yeah.
reversals near the end, complications. And that can be a lot of writers are very wary of plot in general, which I think,
Mhm.
and I can really enjoy a plotless book, but I also think that that idea of working with story events has a lot of potential to it, and it's not. I take issue when people talk about that like an anti-art thing. Like I was
Mhm.
talking about Kazuo
Yeah.
Ishiguro, and he, um, it's not soap opera plotting, but he's a really good sentence writer, but a lot of his prose is like it's not super elegant, super lyrical all
Like
the
doing the
time,
job.
only when he needs to.
Uh,
Um, and the characters are good and there's depth to them, but a lot of the power there comes from the plot and the way he builds up these not super complicated plots, but these characters, hopes and their plans, and then he subverts those things. And it's this really beautiful way of like speaking the language of story and shifting around where you think things are going to go. And
mm,
I think there's a great artistic power to that.
mm. You can say as little or as much as you want about any upcoming projects, and I'd love to shout out social media. Any recommendations about where to buy the book?
I'm kind of promiscuous with projects, and I have to wait for one to really like grab hold of me. So I keep on shifting around between kind of three main projects that I think I'm going to write.
Mm,
So I shouldn't talk too much because I've only got like a chapter of each,
mm.
and any one of them could be the next one or could end up in the scrap pile. I don't know.
Uh,
So hopefully this next year, once the kids are back in school, I can do some heavy drafting
there you go.
and get something done. So I'll have to talk more about that once I know a little more about how my plans are going to work out.
The Nelly
Uh,
Furtado of writing. Promiscuous with projects. I like that phrase.
um, and it was always kind of that way with short stories too. Like I'd start one, and then one feels like it's got
Mm,
more of that right energy, and I know where to go with it.
yeah.
That sort of thing. As far as the book goes, it should be available. Um, I don't know if it's on shelves everywhere as as much as it was when it was in the first 6 months. But I've heard people are still seeing it in Barnes and Noble. Certain indies I know are still stocking it.
Mm,
It can be requested anywhere. Naturally, the best place to buy it is an indie bookstore. Best place is really any place that's not Amazon.
mm,
Bookshop dot. If you have to buy it on Amazon, I won't shame you or judge you, but it's
yeah.
better for the book ecosystem if you are
Yeah.
buying at more responsible retailers like bookshop.org, your
Mm.
local indie bookshop, Barnes and Noble, anything like that.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. You know, it's such a balance you have in this book. You could easily put off people with the science. It's too much, but you don't dumb it down. But it's understandable. You have the light touch with that. And it's obviously, tied into the plot too, like the entropy and things like that. And then again, just the plot keeps you going. So it's such a beautiful marriage of the plot, of the science, of the math, of philosophy, Zeno and the great thinkers. And there's a reason that, it was published under such a great house with Tin House and
Yeah.
NPR and all those people shouted him out. So congrats and great luck with all your future writing.
Well, thank you so much for having me on and for reading it. It's been great to talk about it with you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.